Hello 4C, Teacher Jesse here again with another video. The topic for today's video is going to be Unit 2, Relative Pronouns. Are you ready? Okay, let's get started. I want you to take a look at the picture on the screen here. The man in this picture is my brother. But which man am I talking about? There's two men in this picture, and I've only said that the man is my brother. So which man am I talking about? Well, the man who is standing is my brother. Who is standing, this part of the sentence right here is called a relative clause. Okay? And who is called a relative pronoun. So this is what we are going to be talking about today. We are going to be talking about something called relative clauses, and also a particular part of that clause called the relative pronoun. The relative pronoun is the part that introduces the relative clause, okay? And some of the most common relative pronouns that you will use and that you will see are who, whom, that, and where. There are, of course, other relative pronouns, but these are some of the more common ones. So let's take a look at some examples. Here we have a sentence, the woman who has brown hair was Sheila. Okay? We could just say that the woman was Sheila, but it could be any woman that we are talking about. So to give more information about exactly the person we are talking about, we want to introduce a relative clause. Let's look at another sentence. We don't know the person who donated this money. Okay, let's go back to the first sentence. The woman who has brown hair was Sheila. The relative clause of this sentence is who has brown hair, because it gives us more information about the woman that we are talking about. The relative clause for our second sentence is going to be who donated this money. Okay? The person that we don't know could be anyone. The specific person that we don't know is the one who donated the money. Okay, so that's why we use relative clauses, to give more information about the person, place, or thing that we are talking about. Okay, so again, the first sentence, who has brown hair? We use the relative pronoun who because who is referring to a person. It's referring to the woman that we are talking about. So who is the relative pronoun that is used whenever we are talking about people. Okay? The same thing for the second sentence. Who is a relative pronoun that talks about or describes the person we don't know. Since we're talking about a person, we use the relative pronoun who. Okay, once again, who refers to people who are the subject of our relative clause. Okay, let's look at another example, because there is something that you need to be careful about when using who. Sometimes you actually need to use whom. So, we have some example sentences here. The woman whom I saw yesterday was Sheila. And another sentence, the student whom we chose to give the presentation is sick today. Okay? So why do we use whom in these sentences? We're talking about people, okay? Why don't we say who? Well, we use whom to refer to people who are the object of our relative clause. Let's look at our relative clause. All right? So our relative clause for sentence number 1 is whom I saw yesterday. Okay? And the relative clause for sentence number 2 is whom we chose to give the presentation. We say whom, of course, because we're talking about people. Here we're talking about a woman. Here we're talking about a student. Okay? But look at the clause here. The clause is not about the woman. The clause is about me. The clause is about whom I saw. Since the clause is not about the woman is the object of this clause. She's not the subject. It's not who the sentence, it's not who the clause is about. Okay? Since this clause is about me, not the woman, we call the woman whom. We don't say who. Same thing for sentence number 2. This clause is not about the student who was supposed to give the presentation. This student is about us. It's about the people who chose the student. Okay? The student whom we chose. Since we is the subject of the relative clause, that means the student is the object here. Since the student is the object, we call that person whom. Alright? Pretty complicated, but I think through some practice it'll get easier and easier. Now that we've talked about using who and whom as relative pronouns to talk about people, let's talk about some of our other relative pronouns and how to use them. Here we're going to see some examples of using the relative pronoun that. After we see some examples, we'll talk about when to use that as a relative pronoun. So here's our sentence number 1. It's the same cooker that my mother has. That my mother has is the relative clause of this sentence, where that is the relative pronoun that introduces the clause. Okay? Sentence number 2. She blamed herself for everything that had happened. In this sentence, that had happened is the relative clause, and that is our relative pronoun that introduces the clause. Sentence number 3. The parents that we interviewed were all involved in education. Again, here our relative clause that we interviewed is introduced by the pronoun that. Okay, that is our relative pronoun for this sentence. Sentence number 1, why do we say that? We say that because we are talking about an object. Okay, we're talking about the cooker. Anytime we are talking about an object, the relative pronoun that we must use is that. So it's the same cooker that my mother has. Sentence number 2, we are talking here about everything. Okay, everything is not just one thing, it's all things, okay? But it's still in the category of things or objects. So, since it's in that category, the relative pronoun that we must use is that. We do not say she blamed herself for everything who had happened. We don't say she blamed herself for everything whom had happened. We must say she blamed herself for everything that had happened. Make sense so far? Okay. Number 3 is a little bit different. You might not have expected this, but we can actually use that when we are talking about people. Okay? In sentence number 3 here, we're talking about the parents that we interviewed were all involved in education in some way. Okay? That we interviewed is talking about the parents. In this case, we've chosen to use that to talk about people instead of who or whom. So just know that you can use that when you are talking about people. Okay? But you cannot use who or whom to talk about things. When we want to use that as our relative pronoun. So we can use that when we are talking about people. We can use that when we are talking about animals, and we can also use that when we are talking about things. So, it means that we can say, the woman whom I saw yesterday was Sheila. We can say, we don't know the person who donated this money. We can also say, the woman that I saw yesterday was Sheila. We can also say, we don't know the person that donated this money. We can use whom and who. Since we are talking about people, we can also use that in both of these circumstances because that is fine to use as a relative pronoun to talk about people. Now let's take a look at some more example sentences, and as we look at the sentence, we will answer which relative pronoun correctly completes these sentences. Let's take a look. Sentence number 1. This is the house blank Jack built. Well, this last part of the sentence, blank Jack built, is the relative clause that gives us more information about the house. This is the house. What house are we talking about? Okay, so what is the relative pronoun that completes this sentence? The house is a thing in this circumstance. So, we're talking about the house that Jack built. Okay, we're not talking about a place that Jack visited. We're talking about something that he created. So in this circumstance, the house we are talking about is an object or a thing. So we use the pronoun that. Sentence number 2. Marie Curie is the woman blank discovered radium. Okay. Who, what, or where is this sentence about? Well, this sentence is about a woman named Marie Curie, and she is the woman, that's right, who discovered radium. Since we're talking about a person, we must use the relative pronoun who. Let's look at a third sentence. Sentence number 3. Stratford-upon-Avon is the town blank Shakespeare was born. Now, what is the relative pronoun that we need to complete this sentence? Is the relative pronoun that? Do we say that Stratford-upon-Avon is the town that Shakespeare was born? No, we don't say that. Do we say who? Do we say that Stratford-upon-Avon is the town who Shakespeare was born? No, we don't say that either. What do we say? Well, since we are talking about a place where Shakespeare was born, that is the relative pronoun that we need to use. So sentence number 3 should say, Stratford-upon-Avon is the town where Shakespeare was born. Okay, let's look at our sentence again. Stratford-upon-Avon is the town where Shakespeare was born. Where, again, refers to places. So, Stratford-upon-Avon is the town. What town is it? Well, it's the town where Shakespeare was born. So, the town is what we are talking about. Since it is a place, we must use the relative pronoun where. Understand? Okay. Let's practice now so we can test our knowledge. So here we have some sentences, and again we need to decide which relative pronoun correctly completes these sentences. So, Julio is the man, blank is shaking her hand. Do we need to use where, who, or that? Well, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a person, place, or thing? Well, obviously we're talking about a man named Julio. Julio is the man. Which man is he? Well, he's the man who is shaking her hand. All right, let's look at our next sentence. Paul is the happy man, blank is having a shower. What is the subject of this sentence? What is this sentence about? Well, this sentence is about a happy man named Paul. Since we are talking about a person, what is the relative pronoun that we need to use in order to complete this sentence? Well, remember, anytime that we are talking about people, we can of course use the relative pronoun who. We can say that Paul is the happy man who is having a shower and singing. But remember, we also said that whenever we're talking about people, we can use the relative pronoun that. So we can also say that Paul is the happy man that is having a shower and singing. Both of these examples are correct. All right. Our next sentence, the block of flats, blank he lived, was in Park Avenue. So, in this sentence here, we are talking about a place where someone has lived. Since we're talking about a place where a person lives, what is the relative pronoun that we need to use in order to complete this sentence? Is the relative pronoun where, who, or that? What do you think? That's right. Since we're talking about a place where someone lives, we must use the relative pronoun where. The block of flats where he lived was in Park Avenue. All right, and let's look at our final sentence for today. Tom waited for a letter, blank never arrived. Okay, in this sentence here, we're not talking about Tom, even though Tom is the subject of our sentence. For the relative clause, we're actually talking about the letter. We're talking about the letter that never arrived. A letter is a thing, and for things and objects, the relative pronoun that we need to use is always that. All right, 4C1, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.